Good evening. In this broadcast, the news from the television channel Ostankino. The coordination of legislative activity in Russia. This was the main objective of the meeting conducted today by the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, with heads of the chambers of the Federal Assembly, the Central Election Commission, and the Commons Chamber under the President. The main result of that meeting was the conclusion on the need to create a unified commission in order to coordinate legislative activity. Probably for the first time since the adoption of the new Russian constitution, the heads of the legislative and executive branches of government gathered today with the Central Election Commission and the Commons Chamber under the President. The coordination of legislative activity in Russia was the main objective of the meeting in the Kremlin, which was conducted by the President, Boris Yeltsin. Believe it, I understand well that presidential decrees are not the best method for legal regularization. But please tell me, what must the President do when he sees an evident legal area of vacuum, which is to be perpetuated, and the quicker the empty legislative niches are filled, then unconditionally, there will be a decrease in the volume of presidential intervention in normalization. The head of the government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, and heads of the chambers of the parliament, Vladimir Shumeyko and Ivan Rybkin, in their speeches defined the basic criteria in legislature for the near future. The government's work convinces me that the successful proliferation of economic reforms is impossible without entrenching democratic foundations in Russian statehood. One question which, in my view, if not constructively, but very morally, flows into our conversation today. The issue is the need for, on a priority basis, adoption of a federal law on veterans in the advent of the 50th anniversary of victory. I hope this, as our state and human debt, we should adopt. A question arises, can we be fully satisfied with this work during these 10 months? The answer is evident, no, we can't. The main result of that meeting was concluding that it's necessary to form a united commission to coordinate legislative activity. As the chairman of the commission, the President, Boris Yeltsin, proposed to appoint the first deputy chairman of the State Duma, Mikhail Mityukov. And already priorities have been defined for legislators. They are the budget for next year, taxation legislation, privatization, the building of statehood. The parliamentarians remember that the new elections are approaching, but according to which law they will be conducted is not yet clear. Today, a closed session of the Duma Committee on Defense was held, which discussed the statutes of the military budget. And also, on the eve of tomorrow's speech in the Duma by Pavel Grachov, the committee examined the question about assessing the performance of the Minister of Defense. After the session, the chairman of the committee, Sergei Yushchenkov, gave an interview to our correspondent. Concretely, in the agenda of the session of the State Duma, the question about the departure of Pavel Grachov from his post is not posed. I see no sensation, especially since the committee does not recommend that this question be raised at all in the State Duma. And in this connection, it was proposed at the meeting of the committee to recommend to the State Duma to adopt roughly the following resolution. Most of all, first, the moral psychological condition of the armed forces and the condition foremost of morale training to be recognized as unsatisfactory. Secondly, that at the same time, the condition of morale training does not fully depend on the Ministry of Defense, but is affected by several other factors. Thirdly, to recommend to the President of the Russian Federation to form a state commission, including as members in the committee deputies of the Federal Assembly, in the aims of clarifying the true state of affairs in the armed forces, and fourthly, on the results of the work of that commission in January, to hold parliamentary hearings. Currently, when we hear the military budget, you really want to cry because of helplessness, because for such an army which we have today, these funds are truly insufficient. But how long will we go on supporting this kind of army? Why don't we launch cardinal reforms? The Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachov himself, on the day before his appearance in the State Duma, spent among the troops entrusted to him. Today's meeting of Pavel Gorbachev with officers of the air paratrooper forces in one of the Moscow divisions initially looked completely ordinary and maybe the routine work of the Minister of Defense. As usual, results of combat training were summarized in combat preparations, the state of financial matters and discipline of the most mobile and combat-capable forces, according to the assessment of the Minister of the Armed Forces. However, a completely different mood was set by the former subcommander of the 83rd Air Paratrooper Brigade, the Colonel Vladimir Kazantsev, who spoke after Gorbachev. I wish, on behalf of the paratroopers, to say to all our nationally elected deputies, think, or it will be simply too late. They won't be able to defend us, and I think that we will find enough strength to defend ourselves. Are you threatening us? This is not a threat. This is simply a warning, because we cannot go on like this. Of course, the army is unsuitable. Unsuitable also is the Minister of Defense, who, with your help, does not permit chaos in the country, but people don't understand that. These people don't understand, and those slanted bought newspapers and those people who sometimes appear on television are also bought. To date, they still don't understand fully that the army cannot be used as a political instrument in the struggle for power, because this is always dangerous, because the army has at its disposal terrible weapons. Among the difficulties of the Russian army, there are those which are truly objective, yet it does everything possible to fulfill its interstate responsibilities, including peacekeeping duties and defending the CIS borders. On the Tajik-Afghan border, provocations continue. The last, which was perpetrated last night, became a cause for a serious statement of the commander of the border troops in Tajikistan. Last night, a group of armed gunmen from the Tajik opposition, who crossed over the River Panj from Afghanistan, attacked the 11th border outpost of the Moscow Border Regiment and its combat posts. On the compound of the outpost from the opposite side, 14 shells were fired. This was stated by the commander of the group of border troops of Russia in Tajikistan, Anatoly Chichurin. The criminal act clearly coincided with the day of the inauguration of the President of the Republic and is yet another act in the chain of aggressive actions of the opposition. Despite the assurances of its leaders to peacefully resolve the conflict reflected in a signed agreement on ceasefire, since the 20th of October alone, the border troops were forced 8 times to enter combat clashes. 17 times border units and outposts were fired at by gunmen from the territory of Afghanistan. In the opinion of the commander, the concentration of reserves along the border with Tajikistan, the accumulation of weapons and incremental crossings of the border are proof of a preparation for a new wave of escalation and tension. In Chechnya, near the populous point Bratskaya, 30 tanks burst through the cordons of government forces today. The battle lasted for 4 hours. In the headquarters of the armed forces of Chechnya, Interfax was told that these tanks were moving from northern Ossetia in order to support the Chechnya opposition. In connection with this, the government of Chechnya, in an urgent address to the world community, declared the beginning of a new Russian Caucasus war. Yet, one of the leaders of the Chechnya opposition, Ruslan Hasbulatov, as previously, feels that there are still chances to normalize the situation in Chechnya, and they are extensive. Speaking on a television channel under the opposition's control, he stated today that for the peaceful resolution of the Chechnya problem, it's necessary that as many people as possible should rise up against the Dudayev regime. Nevertheless, in the same address, Hasbulatov played to the Dudayev propaganda methods, frightening the audience with a possible Russian invasion. They will annihilate everyone, even if it's only a lesson to other nations. Ruslan Hasbulatov pathetically exclaimed. We continue. The resolution of the Baltic Council to demilitarize the Kaliningrad district and its further development, which yesterday was severely criticized by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, today evoked an analogous reaction from the Federative Council of Russia as well. In the statement of the Russian parliamentarians, it's noted that the number of Russian forces on the territory of the Kaliningrad district is defined by the interests of defense of the Russian Federation and fully complies with international obligations of Russia. A protest to the members of the Baltic Assembly was sent by the Kaliningrad District Duma. At their session today, the deputies of the Kaliningrad District Duma, in their special statement, expressed a protest against the resolution of the Baltic Assembly to demilitarize the Kaliningrad district and its further development. It's simply astounding, it says in it, how light-handedly the parliamentarians of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are attempting to decide the fate of the million-strong Russian population living in another country, Russia, not having asked even the opinion of that population and having not invited to the session its authorized representative. It's as if our Baltic neighbor parliamentarians have forgotten that the territorial possession of the district by Russia is entrenched by international legal acts, and therefore only Russia can determine its future. In the Kaliningrad district today, the decapitated bodies of 3 Polish citizens were found. The identities of the casualties have been established. They are residents of Poland, and the district prosecutor did not doubt it because since October, 3 citizens of that country were considered missing and were sought. Considering the severity of the crime for the Polish citizens, the best units of the local law enforcement organs were involved under suspicion for the deaths of the 3 Poles. Today, one of the employees of the local timber industry was detained. Today in Moscow, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, met with the head of the Azerbaijani state, Kedar Aliyev. From the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh to broadening economic ties, Kedar Aliyev told the President of Russia about the difficulties being endured in the Republic because of the closing of the Northern Caucasus Railway. It was also stated that despite the 6-month truce in the conflict, the millions of Azerbaijani refugees are again embarking on winter in tent villages. Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin, with understanding, reacted to the problems of Azerbaijan, promising to assist in their immediate resolution. The head of the Russian state congratulated Kedar Aliyev on the recent festivities in Moscow on the occasion of the 500th anniversary of the classic of world literature, the Azerbaijani poet and thinker Fizuli. The friendship between Russia and Azerbaijan has very deep historical roots, and now, on the new level, when the independent countries, Russia and Azerbaijan, have corresponding relations, this friendship should develop and strengthen in the interests of the people of Russia and of Azerbaijan. As is known, the Bakinsk parliamentarians ratified recently the agreement according to which Tehran has received 5% from the Azerbaijani share in the Caspian project. Incidentally, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs doesn't recognize the agreement with the international consortium, which apart from Azerbaijan includes British, Turkish, Norwegian, Saudi, and 5 American companies. And Russia's interests are represented in it by Lukoil, because according to the Soviet-Iranian agreements from 1921 and 1940, the Caspian Shelf is indivisible. This seems to have been confirmed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Mahmoud Vaadzi, at a meeting with Andrei Kozyrev in Moscow a little more than a month ago. However, having reached an agreement with Baku, Tehran, in essence, has voided these agreements, and the Smolensk Square lost its allies in the joint international venture. At the same time, the donation by Azerbaijan of part of its share to Iran will unlikely be significant in changing the situation applicable for Russia. Part of the choice's peace will be lost only by Baku receiving from Tehran in exchange significant aid in developing its national economy. Moscow, thanks to the 10% of the shares of Lukoil, will receive a guaranteed profit. And it's not by coincidence the Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin and the Minister of Fuel and Energy Yuri Shafranik are both hands up for that project. On the current level, Russia is fighting so that the future pipeline to the Black Sea terminals should pass through Georgia and Novorossiysk. Iran, however, insists that the oil line pass through its territory, and although for Baku the second option is more acceptable, Azerbaijan views Russia as one of its main economic partners and is prepared to provide it a regime of preference. Ukrainian parliament today repealed almost 40 legal acts adopted by the Supreme Soviet of Crimea as contradictory to the constitution and laws of Ukraine. During the discussion of the Crimean question, the deputies assumed a very rigid position regarding the Supreme Soviet and the president of that autonomy. The proposals were made to dismiss the Crimean parliament, abolish the institution of presidency. Many parliamentarians insisted on Crimea being deprived of its status as an autonomous republic, demanding to transform it into the Crimean district of Ukraine and schedule elections of a district council. In essence, not one deputy supported the activities of the Crimean authorities. Moreover, the Supreme Soviet adopted a decision to cease financing of those government structures of Crimea which based their activities on legal acts contradictory to Ukrainian laws. The Cabinet of Ministers of Russia examined today questions of price-setting policy. The government asserts that it is pursuing such a policy and illustrates it with the following figures. In 1992, prices in the country rose by 26 times. In 1993, by 9.4 times. In 1994, by 2.8 times. In 1995, the government is confident the growth of prices will be measured by other means and during the year will decrease from 5 to 1%. Today, essentially, the realization of the rigid economic policy of the government began, about which Viktor Chernomyrdin had forewarned frequently, and which is reflected in the state budget for 1995. At the session of the government, proposals of the economic ministries were discussed on price and price setting. Their essence is free market prices on all goods and services, except for products of natural monopolists, which are specially listed. For example, the prices on gas, metals, and heating fuels, the ice-breaking fleet, and others. All of this is connected with the fact that in the conditions of a transitional economy, the attitude of the government to prices is significantly changing. They become not a source of revenues, but a coordinator of the free movement of goods, capital, and labor. Analysis also indicated that price regularization doesn't improve the financial condition of companies and almost does not affect retail prices for consumers. The government, however, regulates as much as it pays from the budget. And the only stumbling block for the members of the cabinet today, unanimously apart from trivia, the supporting the position of the economics ministry, was that the prices on oil should be free, and also they stumbled imagining free prices on oil goods. Although Jacob Urson, the author of the proposal, feels that the price of oil in the worst scenario will increase to 180,000 per ton. Anatoly Chubais, the new economic head, refused to make his own predictions, not denying nor supporting Uronson's promise. As a result of lengthy discussion, it was decided, after all, to again calculate all the potential repercussions of free-floating prices on oil, economic, social, and political ones. The document should be reworked to reflect commentary and submitted to the government in 1 week. On the conflict of the Sakhalin administration with the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, we've already reported in our program. Behind this conflict, there are thousands of people who suffered from the earthquake. Therefore, we continue this topic. So, what is happening with the homes of the container type brought to the South Kurils by the Ministry of Emergency Situations, already numbering 400, so that people can spend the winter in them, who now take cover wherever, in garages, for example? They say that the trailers have one advantage: they will survive in the event of a new earthquake. But the Kuril residents are not convinced of that. Our correspondent reports that they prefer for now to live in their own garages because there it is more reliable and warm. And what with the money which was sent by Moscow to Sakhalin after the Kuril tragedy, because the Kuril residents among the victims told our broadcast that money never reached them. We didn't even have time to discuss. We had to immediately deliver homes. And we did that. I must say that that is thanks to the Ministry of Emergency Situations, that they expediently delivered them. And it's understandable that later we start to clarify what is their quality. As always in Russia, you understand what happens. Nevertheless, we're still delivering these homes and will continue to do that and set them up. It's clear that the initial homes were of not very good quality. Now measures are being developed to improve those homes there on site. But of course, we will continue to deliver them. The money which was sent, the 170 billion rubles, not 1 ruble has been placed in any bank account and is not circulating anywhere. All the money is proceeding according to designation. It remains only to deliver some documented problems. Each family has things to repair because it's not so simple. I would like to convey this and close this criticism between the administration of the district and the Ministry of Emergency Situations. In general, to close the dispute between departments is easier than to convince victims that all is well. To discuss the positions of Russia and France on 2 major international problems, Bosnia and Iraq, and to find paths of their joint resolution. This was the goal which was pursued by the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of France, Alain Juppé, and Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, who is in Paris on an official visit. The last conversations demonstrated the principal agreement in points of view between Moscow and Paris on issues discussed. Regarding Bosnia, they still adhere to the Geneva peace plan to regularize the conflict. Regarding Iraq, Moscow and Paris observers feel that in the presence of close cooperation of Iraq with the Special Commission of the Security Council, and after several months of the test period, conditions will be created to fulfill the corresponding UN resolution to lift the trade embargo against it. At the meeting of Inquisitor for the Prime Minister of France, Edouard Balladur, today they examined the condition of the two-sided relations. And now in detail about the situation in regions which have become a sphere of common Russian-French interests. According to reports from Sarajevo, the presidential palace in the Bosnian capital was subjected to missile attack today. There are injuries. The military police has yet no information about who and with what goal perpetrated the shooting of the building. After a lengthy break today in London, the so-called contact group resumed its work, seeking the paths for peace in former Yugoslavia. I'll remind you that in the contact group included are high-placed representatives of diplomatic departments of Russia, the United States, Great Britain, France, and Germany. In the center of attention of the current session is the new peace plan for Bosnia-Herzegovina, which has received the name Plan B. As is known, the initial plan of the contact group on the territorial division proposed to give 51% of the land to the Republic of the Muslim Croat Federation and 49% of the land to the Bosnian Serbs, who incidentally had rejected the proposed divisions. According to the London newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, Plan B is less severe in its conditions and provides for a more flexible approach to the division of the territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It provides specifically for the mutual acknowledgement by Serbia and Croatia and also granting autonomy to the Serb Krajina. Also, it is planned to renew ties between the Bosnian Serbs and Serb Krajina with Serbia itself. In other words, conditions are being created which are mutually acceptable for the warring sides. Meanwhile, combat activities in western Bosnia have reached their climax. The army of the Bosnian Serbs, in essence, has reclaimed all lands seized by Muslim forces and is in the environs of Bihać. Another strategic point, Velika Kladuša, is occupied by the Serb allies, supporters of the Muslim autonomy in western Bosnia, who are commanded by Fikret Avdić. In these conditions, the Muslim leader, Alija Izetbegović, called on, I quote, the European nations, NATO, the United States, and other friendly nations to interfere in the conflict in order to avoid the complete annihilation of the Fifth Corps of the government forces, unquote. After 3 days of discussion in the Security Council on Iran's step in fulfilling the UN resolution, the proposal of Russia on the gradual lifting of sanctions against Iraq was not accepted. The Security Council only issued a statement in which it's indicated that Iraq has come a significant part of the way to meet the demands of the world community. In the same statement, Russian diplomacy was acknowledged in the matter of Iraq recognizing the sovereignty and borders of Kuwait. This was not the decision Baghdad expected. Iraq leadership had hoped that Russia in the Security Council, together with those who support its position on lifting at least the oil embargo against Iraq, would achieve more radical decisions on that issue. Now, after the position of the United States and Great Britain won over, status quo remains. Iraq cannot increase its trade, and that means a new suffering for its people. Iraq has fulfilled all of its disarmament demands, recognized the border with Kuwait and the sovereignty of the latter. This border, which since April of this year, along its entire 260-kilometer length, sealed off any interaction between these two countries. It was erected pursuant to the UN resolution by Kuwaiti strength and controlled by the UN contingent and a multinational group of officers and an infantry battalion from Bangladesh. I would describe the situation as a permanent state of quiet. All sides which are interested are waiting for a UN decision to return to a normal life. This port was the most lively at one time, where borders met from where oil came from here to the countries of Europe and Japan, and where food medications arrived for Iraq. Now, all of this is in a state of moratorium until stagnation ends, political, military, and economic. The situation is explained not only by the military presence of the United Nations and the active operations of the UN here near Basra, as much as by the loss of blood of one of the sides in the last two military conflicts. The Prime Minister of Ireland, Albert Reynolds, today submitted to the President a request to resign from his cabinet. This decision followed the secession of the coalition of the Liberal Party from government. The Prime Minister stated that he will not pursue suspension of Parliament and early elections. The current administration will fulfill its obligations until a new government is formed. Today, for the third time in the last year, the opposing Italian parties attempted to split the government of Silvio Berlusconi. On the eve of voting on the budget for 1995, the Italian National Party wants to enter the government coalition in place of the neo-fascist alliance. However, despite the efforts of the opposition to carry a non-confidence vote to Silvio Berlusconi, his cabinet survived. The 17th of November, 1989, is a special landmark in Czech history. This was the first day of the Democratic Revolution, although few people could foresee it then, and the beginning of the end of the totalitarian system, the symbol of which was the police baton. The vicious breakup of the student demonstration on National Street in Prague was the first pebble in that pile which eventually buried the former regime. One of the more conservative communist regimes in the entire Eurasian camp collapsed in a matter of only 10 days. As was noted by the president, Václav Havel, in an exclusive interview for Ostankino, such a peaceful character of a velvet revolution was in many ways explained by the conducive international situation, mostly changes which occurred in the USSR during Gorbachev's era, events in Poland and Hungary and other neighboring countries. Can we today, 5 years later, say that expectations and hopes of the Czechs were fulfilled? Some did, and some did not, says the President Havel. We have done much already. We've created a new political system. Democratic institutions are functioning. Foundation of a legal state have been built, and market reforms have allowed to transform the entire economy. But, of course, 5 years ago, in the days of revolutionary euphoria and enthusiasm, other hopes were kindled among the people. For example, that we should become more honest, sincere, and kinder toward each other. Unfortunately, however, the effects of a lengthy communist era were far deeper, and much time will still be needed in order that in society a new moral and spiritual climate would be entrenched for people to acclimatize and accept a new system of values. In conclusion, regarding the two-sided Russian-Czech relations, Václav Havel emphasized that they will continue to develop in the future. The more successful and sturdy will be the victories of democracy in Russia and the Czech Republic. Today, the students of the world have a celebration at International Students' Day. Students of Russian higher academies didn't miss the occasion not only to celebrate, but to remind everyone of their problems. In a festive telegram to the State Duma, the youth of St. Petersburg reminded the parliamentarians about the need to more quickly adopt laws to socially defend students. Without doubt, this telegram could have probably been signed by all Russian students. At a meeting of their representatives, more precisely representatives of the Russian Association of Union Organization of Students, with the chairman of the Russian Committee on Higher Education, on this day, the topic, of course, was the same, the painful topic, that stipends on an average are equal to the cost of 2 fares in the Moscow public transportation. Housing payment under the name rooms in a dorm is around 500,000 rubles is nonsense, and naturally one should be increased and the other decreased, to which the chairman of the aforementioned commission responded with a promise to approach the Duma. But to say precisely what the students did today and what they're like is difficult. One may only assume that they think about this. On a stipend, in the worst scenario, comprising 20,000 rubles, one can live only as an experiment for subsequent publication in Komsomolskaya Pravda in an article titled How I Lived on a Stipend of 23,000, with a subtitle, I Experienced It Myself. According to a poll conducted by the same State Higher Education Department in Russia, 40,000% of the stipends lie on accounts. For years, this money the students feel are not worth the time spent standing in line at the teller. Those who live on stipends and parents' money today are considered to be extremely lazy or botanists. To force them to be seriously indignant today can only be to refuse them a chance to earn or conscription in the army. 60% of the students surveyed in higher academies to the question, how do you live, answered with the same thing, we don't need anything. 15 spoke about material problems. The rest assured that in our times it's indecent to ask. Each survives as he can. That's life. Dorm dwellers are a mystery altogether. Many who live there have been paying the administration from $40 to $100 a month. They say there are such agreements and even special forms for this. I read somewhere that 1% of the population of Russia are geniuses. A quarter are probably students, and probably these are not those who are ushers or ticket sellers in Luzhniki for 900 rubles an hour or guard dachas in Pivdelkina. These are probably those same botanists, 56 hours a week, thinking only about school. And today is the day when they must be remembered. And there is one more international day celebrated today. If we had the strength and willpower, we should extend it for the remainder of our lives. Today in many countries is the day to quit smoking. Since our school days, it was implanted in us. Only one drop of nicotine can kill a horse. And still we smoked, and we do smoke. Although about the harm of smoking everyone knows, and smokers and non-smokers alike. And the scale of this harm, think about it. Each year, because of reasons connected with the use of tobacco, more people die than because of auto crashes, fires, alcohol, drugs, and AIDS together. 3 million people, that's an entire country. Dry statistics prove that on an average, a smoker lives 23 years less than a non-smoker. The civilized part of humanity has understood the effects of smoking. Therefore, in developed countries, there are fewer people smoking these days. Alas, one cannot say that about Russia. What do you like about smoking? Nothing. Nothing. And I don't plan to live long anyway. I know it's harmful and I plan to quit. I would quit gladly. And what's in your way? A little willpower, probably. And yet we have to quit. Millions of the Earth's inhabitants are subjected to this deadly habit, and yet many want to quit. So maybe we'll do this today. Good evening. I'll begin with hockey. After the marvelous tournament of the Stars of Russia, I'll have to disappoint the fans of this popular game somewhat. The players, the wings of the Soviets, across the ocean held 7 matches with the clubs of the International Hockey League, and alas, lost every single one. And in today's matches for the Interstate Hockey League, the wings tied the Chemists 4-4. The Moscow Spartak, visiting, beat the Pardogava team 3-0, and the Petersburg Army team demolished the leader of the Western Zone, the Torpedoes from Nizhny Novgorod, 6-1. And how about soccer? The qualifying rounds of the European Championships. In our 8th group, the Finnish team beat the Faroe Islands team 5-0. The Russian team played in Glasgow with the Scottish team. This match was of equal rivals, and everything was decided in the first time. At the 19th minute, the Scot beat our defense and Cherchesov. And 6 minutes later, in the same situation, was Dmitry Radchenko, and he also didn't fail. The score 1-1. The Greek team, in the event of victory over San Marino, would become a leader of the group. The Greeks achieved this goal, gaining 9 points. A marvelous goal on the 21st minute was scored by Machlos. And not long before the final whistle, the hosts of the field scored a second time. In the 4th group, there are 2 sensations. The Lithuanian team beat the Slovenian team 2-1, and the Italians at home lost the Croats with the same score. On the Croatian team, Daro Šuker excelled twice, first in the first and later in the second. In the 90th minute, Dino Baggio scored a prestigious goal. The victory of the Croats, 2-1. Good evening. For several days already, the weather of the majority of European Russia is affected by a cyclone over the Barents Sea. It has brought warm and humid air into this area. Tomorrow, its influence will spread to the Volgovyatsk area, the Republic of Komi, and the Nenets Autonomous District, and the Polar Ural. Colds will weaken, southwest winds will increase, there will be isolated wet snows and possible drizzle during the day, -2 to -4, in the Polar Ural, -6 to -8 degrees. On the Kola Peninsula, the Arhangelsk district, and in Karelia, from the north, cold air will begin to seep in. It will be cloudy with isolated snows during the day, -2 to -7. Wet and damp weather will continue in the Baltic countries and Belarus during the day, +2 to 6 degrees. It will be cloudy tomorrow in the central and central Chernozem areas. Snow with rain will pass in the morning and evening fogs, temperatures +2 to 5 degrees. In the north of the central region, +1 to -3. Along the Volga, a cold front will bring wet snow, which will turn into rain, gusty winds and drizzle, temperatures from 0 to +3. On the lower Volga, in the republics of the Northern Caucasus and the Krasnodar and Stavropol Rim areas, cloudy but without precipitation. Only on the lower Don, mild rains from +3 to +8 degrees. Through Ukraine and Moldova, a warm atmospheric front will pass. Therefore, it will be cloudy and windy with isolated rains during the day, +4 to 9. In Georgia and Armenia, it's warm, +13 to +15. In Azerbaijan, some light rain, +11 to 13 degrees. In Petersburg, tomorrow it will be cloudy with partial clearings of the sky, with isolated light precipitation at night -3 to 5, during the day 0 -2. An atmospheric front which brought unpleasant weather to Moscow has shifted to the east. But the weather, unfortunately, tomorrow will not improve. It will be cloudy and damp, although forecasters promise that during the day there will be some breaks in the clouds. During the day and night around 0. This was information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia, and the Russian Food Bank hopes that your morning will be pleasant. Goodbye.